Welcome back to part 2 of our study on the names of God. Last week in part 1, we began taking a closer look at the names of God. Now, why are we doing this? Well, as mentioned in that study, names carry more of a meaning than what we have come to generally think. And that's why we see God changing the names of people whenever he would make a covenant with them or bless them. Such as, for example, he changed the name of Avram to Avraham. Now, given the importance of names, it would therefore benefit us to examine the names which God has given himself. If he places an importance on names, then all the more would God then want us to understand the names which he has revealed to us about himself. After all, he didn't name himself for his own benefit. He did it for our benefit, because he wants us to know him and his character. So we continue today to look at the names of God and what they show us about himself, about his nature, about his character, so that we would have a deeper understanding and a deeper relationship with him. Welcome to Thriving Branch. I'm Jim. Today we are continuing our study on the names of God. And what we saw last week was the first compound name of God, which was Yahweh Shammah, meaning the ever-existing God who is always present. And what you're going to find is that that is a foundation upon which what we're going to see today can be continued and built more. We saw how the name Yahweh Shammah, how it can inform us about his nature, give us confidence regarding his reliability. You see, the world, and sadly modern Christianity, tends to hold a view of God that is less than reliable in many circumstances. They often express an idea of a God that is more of a gamble, rather than a reliable source of help. And that's why that name that we saw last week is so fundamental. What we saw is that God is, in fact, ever present, always with us, always reliable in every single circumstance and situation. Now we're going to continue to build upon that foundation as we see another name of God, another name which God has revealed to us about himself. And it's found in Genesis chapter 22, verse 14. That's a name that many people are familiar with, and it's Yahweh Yireh, which is more commonly transliterated as Jehovah Jireh. That probably sounds more familiar to you. But the name is actually pronounced Yahweh Yireh. It translates to the ever-existing God who sees to it. And that word sees to it, that phrase, it's in the sense of supplying. And this is probably one of the most commonly known of all the compound names of God. And it's often misunderstood to mean God will provide in the future tense. And this leads many people into thinking that they need to play some kind of waiting game with God. However, that's not actually the case. That's not what the name actually means. It's not saying that you have to wait on God. You always have to wait on God. You see, the name Yahweh Yireh does not actually mean that God will provide in the future, but it means God who is presently seeing to it, presently supplying, presently right now. And much like the name that we studied last week, the focus here is still on God's present reality, still on God's present help. He's not merely the God of the past only, nor is he the distant God of the future, but he is the God of the present as well, and able and willing to help us right now. And he is doing so. That is the focus of the name Yahweh Yireh. The fact that he is a present source of help. Examining the verse which the name is found in, we see that Abraham named the place where God provided the sacrificial ram, which is, by the way, a direct picture of Jesus. We've studied that in prior studies. And we also saw that Abraham was certain of God's provision. It wasn't a guessing game. It wasn't a fleeting hope. It was a reliable certainty. And the same holds true for us today, my friend. God is just as real, just as present, just as providing for us today as he was in the scriptures. The question is, do we believe the way that he's revealed himself? Or do we instead believe what common man-made opinion says about him? Which are we going to believe? I suggest, humbly, that we start taking God at his word. Especially his word regarding who he says that he is. And allow his description of himself to inform our relationship with him. Who knows him better than him? That's the question that each of us has to ask. Are we going to let what he has revealed about himself inform our relationship? Or are we going to allow our current circumstances, our current ideas, our current feelings to inform us about our relationship with him? You see, he's given us these names, revealed these names to us, precisely so that we can know him. I know that I keep repeating that, but it's worthy of repeating because it's so easy to forget. Many of these names of God, you're going to find that you already know them. You're already familiar with them. But are we looking at them and seeing everything that they're telling us? Or do we just think, oh, that's interesting trivia. God has this many names. God has this name. Oh, that's interesting. But what does it mean regarding our relationship? That's the point of this study. What do these names actually tell us about God? And how will knowing these names and what they say about him change our relationship? When we begin to simply accept the truth about God and about how good and about how trustworthy he really is, that is when our relationship with him will begin to flourish and begin to grow in ways that we could only dream about before. Take, for example, another name of God for us to look at, which is Yahweh Ruiz, found most notably in Psalm chapter 23, verse 1. And again, many of us are familiar with this name of God. It's the ever-existing God, my shepherd. Many of us are familiar with that. But it goes deeper than that. Because when is the last time you have stopped to meditate on what a shepherd, specifically a Hebrew shepherd, in ancient times actually does for his sheep? As it turns out, we can learn a bit from the language here as well that will give us some insight. The word roi, which means my shepherd, comes from the root verb ra'ah, which means to tend for, to care for, to feed, to protect, and to cause to rest. I know that some automated translate tools will incorrectly translate the root verb as evil, but the root verb ra'ah actually means to tend for, to care for, to feed, to protect, and cause to rest. And in other words, that's everything a shepherd will do. Now, where this really gets interesting is in the way that this relates to our interaction and relationship with God. Let me ask you a question. How many people do you know that actually think of God in this fashion, doing all of these things for them? How often do you think of God as tending for you, caring for you, feeding you, protecting you, or causing you to rest? We don't typically see God through those lenses on a day-to-day basis. Sure, we might think of it once in a while on Sunday. We might think of it once in a while when we are specifically looking in that direction with that perspective. But on a day-to-day basis, how often do you think of God through those lenses? It's okay to admit it if you don't, because honestly, many people don't see God as being that involved. Do you see the point? Many people don't think of God in this way typically. Many people don't see God as one who actually does care, one who actually tends to them. And that's part of what this study today is addressing. The fact that we need to let go of these human ideas and our own opinions and our little pet theologies about God and simply receiving Him the way that He describes Himself. If He says that He is that good and that loving and that merciful and that concerned and involved in our well-being, then we should simply take Him at His word about it. Again, He did not reveal these names for His own benefit. He revealed these names for our benefit so that we would know who He is, what His character is, what His nature is. As I mentioned before, and I'll continue to mention it, because it's so important to our relationship with Him, so that we wouldn't be left guessing about His will. We wouldn't be left guessing about what He desires to do, about His provision, His goodness, His reliability, or His love and His care for us. So many people whom I've spoken with always tell me that they just aren't sure of God's will. Yet He revealed Himself with these names precisely so that we would know. We would know His will. If God describes Himself as ever present, always with us, then why do we sometimes think that He isn't? Where do you think that thought actually comes from? Where is the source of that thought? And what do you think that thought will lead to? Same question about provision, protection, love, care, and all of the other names that we have yet to study. If God says that He is A, and a thought or a feeling or an idea or a doctrine comes along that says He is B, we should throw out the thought that tells us about B then. We should throw out that doctrine. We should throw away that idea, that feeling, if it directly contradicts what God has said about Himself. If God says that He is A, and a thought or a feeling or a doctrine comes along that says that He is B, we should throw this away. Quite honestly, and I'm going to be blunt here, anything that challenges the nature and the character of God that he himself has revealed isn't worth one single second of consideration. Again, I ask the question that I asked earlier in this study. What are we really going to believe? Each of us has a choice. Does that seem harsh? Does that seem extreme? Well, no more than Paul or Titus. As is recorded in Galatians chapter 2, they gave no attention to any falsehood being spread around, because they knew that such falsehoods would bring them back into bondage. Christ and his truth was making people free, and the lies were trying to enslave the people all over again. And this, my friend, is the point of everything that we are studying. As you see the truth of God, as you see the love of the Father, as you see the freedom of the Son, the power of the Spirit, as you see the way in which God truly has revealed himself and the way that he truly cares for you, that truth will free you. So then, anything which would set itself up or against that truth and distract you or try to sway you from that truth, from the revealed character of God, from the very thing that is freeing you, that, by definition, is an enemy of the gospel. And that's exactly what Paul and Titus were saying in Galatians chapter 2. Please don't take my word for it. Read it for yourself. And as we continue looking at the names of God, the names which he has revealed to us, we should be open to the plain and simple truth of his amazing love, his care, his grace, and we should be willing to let his truth about himself override any other ideas, even long-held ideas. And in closing today, I want to encourage you to take some time, truly meditate on the names of God which we have studied thus far. And ask yourself, how do these names enhance your relationship and your union with Christ? How do these names change maybe some beliefs that you've had, some ideas that you've had about God that are no longer lining up with what he has revealed about himself? How will these names enlarge your perspective of who God is and your relationship with him? Because that's what all of this is really about. Join me again next week as we continue looking at the names of God. And until then, be blessed.